Because of the impending war in Europe, Alfred Harmsworth and Harold Harmsworth were searching for a site to set up a pulp and paper mill as an alternative source of newsprint for their family papers and publishing interests. In 1905, during the search, Harold Harmsworth and Mason Beaton discovered what was known as the Grand Falls, discovered by John Cartwright in 1768 while following the Exploits River through the valley. On January the 7th, 1905, the Anglo-Newfoundland Development Company was formed and construction began right away on the mill. People were pulling up their boats and nets for the last time, all across the country of Newfoundland, leaving for a brighter future, building the paper mill at Grand Falls. A rough estimate has it that people from over 300 communities headed to Grand Falls by train or whatever means they could to get work in this new bold industry that was emerging. They say this was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in Newfoundland. As time went on, more and more people were arriving, hearing of the great things that were happening in Grand Falls. On October the 9th, 1909, the mill opened its doors with first production on December the 22nd. In 1905, with the construction of the mill and more people living next to the railway at the station, Bury and Stewart set up businesses to serve the railway and the station people. The early settlers of Grand Falls Station came from all over the island and lived in what was known as tar paper shacks and cabins. As more and more people arrived, there was a need for more services. A hotel was built in 1910 along with many other businesses that followed without much planning. As the station grew, things got tough. With fires in the early 20s, strike at the mill, sickness, poor sanitary conditions, attempts were made by J.A. Spencer and P.F. Brown to improve things. Following a trip to St. John's by Brown and Spencer, a board of management was set up in 1937. By 1938, following some opposition, Grand Falls Station changed its name to Windsor and was incorporated on November the 1st, 1938, under the Board of Management. How old were you when you went to work for Father Meanie?
Well, I was in grade 9. That's why about 15, I suppose. 14 or 15, probably.
And you went to work with him at the theatre. What was your first job at the theatre?
Oh, at the door, at the door, keeping the ruffians out.
What about the projection? Did you work in the projection room?
Yeah,
How many years did you work there?
probably 10,
10 years.
maybe. Yeah. Steve Knight was running the outfit,
Um,
and I learned from him how to operate the outfits.
Dave, what kind of person was Father Meanie for those looking on the outside in? Like Father Meanie was always noted to be a rough and tumble fella, but what really was Father Meanie like when you're working for him and otherwise?
He was great by him. He was a great fellow to work for, you know, and he didn't come over and interfere with what we were doing, hey? He might drop in for a few minutes sometimes, but very often.
How many years did the theatre at St. Joseph's operate?
But I don't know, probably 10 years or so, you know. I don't know, I didn't bother, you know, what was it, how long it was there, it's just that I was there.
You were there when you got out of school too.
Yeah, I started when I was in school there. When I finished school, then I stayed there, you know. Steve Knight was the boss, at there, and I was under him, and I don't know, probably about 7 or 8 years before something happened to Steve. Myself and Jim Philpott used to go over to get the stuff for the furnace, and he had this Pinto, this dog, Meanie did, and we went over there and we heard him bark, you know, and so we scattered into the basement. So on the way out, I said to Jim, I said, now if Pinto comes, you know, don't run, see? And we had a bucket of coal each going. Just as we got out of the basement, church basement, we heard bark, and Jim took off, and I stayed there, and the dog come over the fence, and he grabbed me by the leg. And by that time, Father Meanie was out and bawled it, and then he got him in, and he took me up to the convent for them to, where I had the leg bites and that, and they brought him up there, and the nuns fixed me up. I understand you were close to a businessman, George Stewart, who operated on Main Street for many, many years. What kind of person was he for those of us who did not know him personally? We all heard the stories of George, but what was George really all about?
It's a tough question. George Stewart was a man that was very difficult and hard to get to know personally. He was a person that liked his space and liked to be left alone. But I got to know George back really well in 1977. When I looked for a place to rent for my business that I started in 1975, we approached George and he had a bit of space to let us have at his hardware store. And from 1977 up to 1999, I was a renter of George's, and over the years I became very close to him, and it was very personal. George Stewart was a man that helped a lot of people in the Grand Falls, Windsor area, particularly the Windsor area. He didn't want anybody to know about it. He didn't want any credit for it. He refused to have any recognition in any way. But reading between the lines sometimes over the years, and I know of a lot of cases where people came to me and said, I got a package of groceries, or I got this, or I got that. Didn't know where it come from, but I got a good feeling it came from George Stewart. And George didn't tell anybody. There's only a few people that know him, but a lot of people got help. Very kind man, but he didn't want anybody to know. And it was unfortunate because he never got the credit that he should have got, and he never got the recognition, but he didn't want it. That was the hardest part about it. People tried to recognize him, but he was just wanted to be left alone. And God only knows how much good he done to individuals. He was not a very lover of governments or councils or in most organizations. He had a lot of respect for some. SPCA was one of his passions, love of helping. People didn't know how much, but I understand from different people saying that he was good to the SPCA over the years. People in need in general, I mean, the stories that I heard was just hundreds and hundreds of stories of George doing things that you wouldn't think that he'd done, but he did. And I had a lot of respect for him. I learned a lot from him. I spent a lot of time with him over the years, a lot of conversations with him. He trusted me enough to give me things and tell me things that a lot of other people wouldn't have known anything about, or wouldn't have got the same opportunity that I got, and my family. He was good to all of my family. Great friend of my father's, and over the years, I tell you, I respected him a lot, and since he passed away, I really missed him. And I got many calls from him, just wanted to talk, come and see me, and we've had some really good conversations. And I don't think he wanted me to share that with other people, but I would love to have to write them down and share them if I knew he would be okay with it. But he told me in confidence, and I'll go to my grave with a lot of stories that I enjoyed hearing from him. And with Father Meanie, I got to know Father Meanie really well over the years and become a real close personal friend of his. I know a lot of stories that went on that both Father Meanie and George told me, that if got out, then George probably would not be the same. And I know I can say for a fact that he helped a lot of people with Father Meanie. No one knows how many stories there are there, because I've heard a lot of them. I spent a lot of time sitting down drinking tea with Father Meanie in his later days, when, especially a few years before he passed away, and became very close friends and heard a lot of stories. You're right, there were some good people in Windsor over the years that helped a lot of people, and a lot of people kept it quiet because they knew that that's what George wanted, and I guess that's what Father Meanie wanted. Didn't want no praise, no credit, done it out of the goodness of their hearts, and that's the way they wanted to keep it, and that's the way they wanted to keep it.
With regard to my childhood, it was pretty common to the rest of my friends. My father was a mill worker, as was my wife's father at the time, and we were reared on basic food, and of course this like moose and rabbits and trout, because my father was a woodsman along with his buddies Ron Pinson and Mike Pinson, and he you know, brought home things for the larder. Of course, now in 2013, we eat very little of that. I don't apologize for that. I guess we had our fill of it. But we also supplemented. I remember Thursdays down the George Stewart's when you had, that was food day. And the baskets would be piled high, and the food was plentiful because it wasn't expensive at that time, comparatively speaking. So, and it was good enough because we had families, of course. I was the last of 8. And my wife was the last, or not the last, but she was one of 17. So you know, and of course, when it came to trying to acquire food, you'd have to be a millionaire if the food cost very much. I remember too some fun we used to have. We used to have our neighborhood groups. You know, we'd be up on the mountains playing cowboys and Indians. We'd be down cutting boughs, and for a bonfire night, we'd be down cutting alders for bows and arrows and stuff like that. We know we'd be getting into all kinds of trouble. I remember two of my old buddies, Art Ryan and Wayne Hedges. They used to be, I think, raising a litter of pups or a litter of kittens up on their Fred Mayman's sawmill. That's the kind of thing they did when they were going to school with me. So we had all kinds of activities that we enjoyed, and you know, we went to the bike riding, we're into swimming up the boating club and wherever. As a matter of fact, when I was about 10 years old, I almost drowned up the boating club. I fell off the wharf. And prior to that, when I was 5 years old, I fell in a puncheon. We call them a puncheon, which is a very large barrel. I was trying to get some water out of it for some reason. And I remember my mother coming out and grabbing me by the ankles and dragging me out. So I've come close to death twice in terms of drowning. I hope it's not going to be my fate. I'm hoping to live to be about 99. And of course, we weren't all angels when we were growing up. I mean, we had our little bit of devilment as we went through life. I remember one time when we did up one of these box packages and put it on a man's doorstep and knocked on his door, because there were very few doorbells, ran down and jumped under his house where it was dug out. And when he came out and looked around and nobody there and he reached down for it, then of course we would yank it. And he threw a few choice words after us as we scrambled out from under the house and ran down the hill. Another memory, one that's I've told before, is one that has to do with Jenny night, or Mummer night. We never call it Mummer, we always call it Jenny. We went down to Mrs. Dawes, down on Coronation Street. Now she is Chloe Young's mother. And we went down there, and most of us were Protestants, and as I said, we didn't know how to sing, we didn't know how to dance. But anyway, she treated us well, and she offered us a little lunch as you normally do after it's over, and she said, you know, some syrup, of course, which would have been purity in those days, and she mentioned the idea of a piece of cake. And I said, yes, okay. I said, I'll have a piece of dark chocolate, dark cake, not chocolate, but the fruit cake you get Christmas time. She said, my son, she said, I haven't got any dark fruit cake, I only got light stuff. But she said, you can take it out in the porch, she said, there's no light out there. And we got a kick out of that. She was very witty, she was, and a very fine woman. Well, with regard to honorariums, I never did join Windsor Council for that because they weren't getting any. As a matter of fact, in the 13 years I spent on the Windsor Council, we got an honorarium 1 year. I think it was $1,000 or $500, and we voted that away next year. We knew we couldn't afford it. So that was the extent of my honorarium there on Windsor Council versus my time in Grand Falls, Windsor. But I remember we had a good working group. Some mayors were well organized with committee systems, some weren't, and so meetings were dragged out. We had a bit of acrimony at times. I found that sometimes people in the town were treated in a certain way as opposed to others who had grievances against that kind of treatment. And I tried to right any wrongs I saw in that respect. As a matter of fact, I was chastised for bringing it up one time. But I have no qualms about that. I also remember, of course, the idea that there were people in the town that could not afford to pay their taxes. And we try to deal with that. I mean, today it's a pretty perfunctory thing. You know, if you can't pay, it's a possibility we will take your property. Now, it hasn't happened, to my knowledge, to any great extent in Grand Falls, Windsor. We get councillors that go by the rules totally, and they don't cut any slack for anyone. And I don't think you can or run a council that way. You have to do what you can for the people while you do what you can for the whole of the town in terms of infrastructure. So you got to strike a happy balance there somewhere, especially in terms of taxation. I served with Larry McCarthy, I served with Jim Hogan, I served with Claire King, I served with Walwyn Blackmore. And of course, that came to an end in 1990, I'm sorry, when we decided to discuss amalgamation. And the last council, instead of being 4 years, was 5 years. And we got elected to the Amalgamated Council in November of '90 and took over January 1st, 1991. I just want to express my gratitude now after, having set out in 1972 and my municipal journey, which terminated in 1997. I want to express to the people, I know I must have done on many occasions over the years, but I want to thank them for their support over the years by electing me to council and being supportive on an ongoing basis. I tried to do my best, and I think I was fairly successful. Of course, I was maintaining a full-time teaching position and being a father, and now I've moved into the grandfather stage, and I'm too old for either my own kids or council, and that's the reason I'm not running, of course. So I want to thank you, the people of Windsor. I also want to thank the people of Grand Falls, Windsor, for electing me. I must say it's quite an education, and one that I've always found very beneficial to me in my individual development. So thank you very much.
At the turn of the century, Simon Cone arrived in Newfoundland to work for the Newfoundland Clothing Company of St. John's. Mr. Cone left Newfoundland in 1905 for the United States to try business on his own terms, where the remainder of his family were born. After the war in 1919, Simon Cone and his son, Charles, returned to Newfoundland and opened a shop in Grand Falls Station, which later became Windsor. The business was showing signs of growing and expanding, but just before Christmas in 1944, it was destroyed by fire. They pulled themselves up from the ashes and opened a bigger building. As the business grew, Jack, Maurice, and Michael joined in the running of the business. The family also offered a bus service for customers. In 1948, Michael's son Boyd left Acadia University and joined the firm. They would add furniture to the business. By 1953, the furniture was separate from the dry goods. Boyd would bring in boxcar loads of furniture. As time went on, Boyd expanded the business from one store to number 29 in Labrador in 1985 under new owners Charles R. Bell. St. Joseph's School was not immune to tragedy. You see, on March the 1st, 1963, tragedy struck St. Joseph's School community and the town of Windsor. On the first Friday of the month, as part of the Catholic faith, students would attend Mass. It was just a normal day for 10-year-old Terry Jackson, who left Mass and was walking home with friends and come to the railway crossing. Somehow, someway, Terry got swept under the train, killing him instantly. Terry left this world, leaving a large and loving family. Terry Jackson would have turned 60 on June the 24th.
my grandparents were Ned Power, or Edward Power. Some people call them Nettie. And my grandmother was Clara Power. And Nan came from Ballarstown in Placentia. And my grandfather, Ned Power, was born in Pelly's Island. And he worked in Fishot Island, off the eastern tip of the Great Northern Peninsula for some years. And he worked on the Bayvert Peninsula. And he was a fisherman, a logger, a woodsman, a entrepreneur in his later years. And he was a great raconteur, great storyteller, delivered great recitations, and he was a very witty man, and he was stocky and solid and strong and resilient, and he could box with the best of them. And so he was one of Windsor's true characters. And I also think about people like Howard Quinton, who just died in the last year or so, Harry Rowe, my uncle Lynn Miller, Ted Barker, and so a lot of Len Patey, a lot of very interesting, colorful characters who I really enjoyed growing up. So Wayne, I always found the people and the characters in Windsor very interesting, fun to be with. I learned a lot from them. I have lots of warm childhood memories, and I always enjoy coming back home to Grand Falls and Windsor and to meet old friends and family. And this weekend I was at my dad's cabin in West Stony Brook. We had a wonderful time. And Wayne, I've been thinking this weekend about some of the great friends I made growing up in Windsor and the family names and the diversity of these families. But the family names included Barry, Baker, Corbin, Sullivan, Beeson, Day, Lynch, Hamlin, Keogh, Hedges, Higgins, Philpott, Murphy. And Wayne, there was a great community spirit in Windsor. And I remember my mom and other moms in Windsor in the early 70s campaigning to have a new stadium built in Windsor. So this was my first lesson in civic-minded responsibilities. And my mom would take me and my siblings, who were old enough at the time, on bottle drives to raise money. We used to show movies at St. Joseph's Auditorium. We would sell popcorn and baked goods and whatever. And so over a number of years, the people in Windsor, and the moms in particular and the dads, helped raise a lot of money to build that stadium in Windsor. And of course my younger brother Corey was one of the first kids to benefit from that stadium. So lots of great memories there. It was also very interesting, the business people in Windsor, of Jewish heritage, of Chinese heritage, Lebanese, Irish, and German. And I think of Cones and Riss, where my mom worked for many years. And I think of the Economy Store, Stewart's, think of the Cozy Chat, the Globe Restaurant, the Chels, Tony Kim's, the Brown Derby, Munch's Shoe Repair Shop. It was wonderful to meet all these people and to know these people growing up. And my earliest memories of entrepreneurship, of course, were growing up in Windsor. I used to sell the Evening Telegram in Windsor, the Toronto Star. My real job was at the Cozy Chat when I was 12 or 13, I guess, in the early 70s. And I was the boy who was selling sandwiches and soft drinks to the patrons on the CN buses when you'd stop at what we used to call the Windsor Station. And it was a real lesson in entrepreneurship because Mrs. Mary Basha and Di Bowes, the people I worked for, were driving me, of course, to sell as much as I could. And we had some competition with the Strouds just to the west of the Cozy Chat. And so the young boy who was working for Strauss and myself, we would compete to get to be the first person on the bus to sell the drinks and the sandwiches. And of course, if you got on first, you'd keep your elbows out to keep your competition behind you. So that lesson served me well in business in later years.
My grandfather, P.J. Connors, moved here in 1905 to set up the railway company in the town, or wasn't the town of Windsor at the time, it was Grand Falls Station, and that was in 1905, and that was the same time that they started construction of the A&D company in Grand Falls. So the railway had gone through earlier in the late 1800s, 1897, I think. but they came out to Grand Falls in 1905 and set up a station. He was the first station agent in Grand Falls. He worked there until 1909. He went back to, he was from Harbour Grace. He went back and he got married, and he brought his wife out here in 1909. And my father was born in 1920. Gerald Connors. He was one of two sons, and PJ also had two daughters, and they took up residence here in the town of Windsor, and that's where the Connorses began.
When did the business start? When it started, was it a partnership or was it a family business?
Well, my father was, he was in business a number of years before Brown Derby. My father was a real entrepreneur. He had a taxi business, the New Deal taxi service between the Grand Falls station and the town of Grand Falls. And he started that, and from that he built a trucking business, and he operated a trucking business for years. And then during the war in 1940, he started a company called Crystal Springs Beverage, which was located on Bond Street in Windsor. And he, from there, during the war, he used to send a truckload of beverages every day down to the base in Botwood, where there were, I think it was 1,500 or 2,000 Army people down at the base in Botwood, and so he done that until 1945. But until the Brown Derby restaurant started in 1943 in the town of Windsor, and it burnt down, the first original building, so they built a second building in November of 1944. So from there, the restaurant business was the initial operation there, and back in those days was before Confederation. So my father and Mr. Stroud, who was his partner, R.D. Stroud, they were partners right back through during, even with the Ideals taxi business and the trucking business. But Mr. Stroud served overseas between 1941, 1945, or 44, I'm not sure. So my father carried on the business while he was away. So when he came back, then they started up the restaurant. Like I say, it was before Confederation, and so all the products that were needed in the business at the time, and back in 1944, had to be imported, either from England or from mainland Canada or the U.S. So they used to have to bring it in bulk, and because they had to bring in so much product back in those days, they started up a wholesale business and started supplying a lot of the small stores around Grand Falls, Windsor, and Bishop Falls. So that's how Brown Derby Wholesale started. And they used to bring in the product and sell some of it in the restaurant, and then sell the other products to the different stores. And back in those days, there was probably 15 family businesses, convenience stores in Windsor alone. So it's not like it is today. There was a lot of convenience stores, and they had problems getting products. So Mr. Stroud and my father decided that it would be a great opportunity to start up a wholesale business. Wholesale, summer of '44. So in November of 1944, there was a fire, and this whole street here, right down up through, burnt out. And so in 1945, they built this restaurant here, which was it was on the property out there for right up until about 3 or 4 years ago. We tore the building down, but and this is the existing. This is the new building we're in here, right? this is Mr. Stroud, who was my father's partner, right? And who I eventually bought out and after I came back from university. So, but this little history of what happened. The street burnt down.
Ray, what was it like growing up in Windsor in the late 50s and 60s?
It was a good place to grow up. I remember when I was a young fellow, we done a lot of outdoor activities. There was no paved roads at the time in my early days here, and we done a lot of playing ball at what they call the BA field on Main Street West, and of course soccer down on Main Street beyond the repeater station, we used to call it, across from the Altamar station there, and also in Rushy Pond, what we call Little Rushy. We used to be in there playing lots of ball and soccer, and go to Redcliffe sometimes on the fields up there to play games and soccer and ball. We always kept busy in the outdoors. There was a lot of good areas, open areas. On Elizabeth Street we played hockey, street hockey, and then when the pavement came early 60s on 2nd Avenue, we used to play street hockey on the pavement on 2nd Avenue, which everybody thought was so great. And Carpenter Stroud had a big field just off 2nd Avenue there that we used to play a lot of ball and outdoor games and stuff like that. We always fished, always went in the back of Windsor and what we called the gullies, and everybody knew that's the gullies. Every evening, especially in the spring after the ice go out, we'd be fishing for days and days and days after school. And of course, everywhere we had to walk back in them days, and you know, we had a lot of outdoor activities. There wasn't very much in the way of indoor activities. At school, I didn't know what a gymnasium was until I graduated grade 11. First time I ever went to a gymnasium. But that was in 1972. So before that, we always got together as groups of people in our neighborhood. Particularly in them days, we used to be the west end of Windsor, central Windsor, and the east end of Windsor, what we used to call the jungle at the time. And that was remembered as a lot of competitiveness between the west end and the east end. So we always kept very, very busy. We didn't have water and sewer in the early days where we lived on Patrick Street. I remember when the water and sewer came in there. It was always a challenge. Chores was a big thing. You had to get firewood, bring in the firewood, coal, bring water, all those things that people don't realize that we had to do in Windsor at one time. It was never so good as what we got it now back in the early days. There was a lot of challenges, and young people had to do their chores, and all my friends the same way. And we had to do our chores before we could do our activities. Outdoor activities were a big thing for us because we had to be a neighborhood. And the East End, Windsor, Main Street, West, and that area, 2nd Avenue area, there was a lot of friendship there. Everybody seemed to be friends, no matter what school you went to or what church you went to. People always helped out. We always played together. We always done things together. It was a great, great place to grow up in, and I got a lot of fond memories of growing up in Windsor, and I cherish every one of them. Well, I remember very well all the businesses on Main Street. I remember as a boy, every day we walked from Patrick Street out down to Main Street. When I was old enough to do it, we went alone, but even before that, when I went with my parents, we'd go on Main Street. It was a very, very busy place. It was a job to get a parking space for those that had cars, and not everybody had cars back in the early 60s and late 50s. I remember trying to walk up Main Street, and it'd be just shoulder to shoulder, people going in and out of the stores. Riffs was a very busy place, and Cohen's, and even the smaller stores. I remember going in Pat Kearney's, and the Chip Van on Main Street. The theater was a very busy place. There was a few restaurants there with on Main Street, a couple of Chinese restaurants, and it was just a hustle and bustle all the time, especially when the trains came in. You had a lot of people passing through, but got off the trains and shopped on Main Street or went to the restaurants. And then when I got old enough, I used to be down there daytime when the trains come in. We'd be down there and we'd jump on the trains and run through the different cars, and we kicked off by the conductor. And it was a lot of fun growing up in Windsor, and it was a lot of fun meeting new people coming in, because every time you went on Main Street during the day, you see someone different, someone new in town, and a lot of people had a lot of respect for Main Street in Windsor. It was a typical Main Street for a big community at that time. Windsor was a big community, and a lot to offer. The business atmosphere in Windsor was really lucrative. A lot of people were very successful on Main Street, and from one end to the other, I remember just about every store that was on Main Street from probably late 50s on.
When did you see the change coming when Main Street started to lose some of its lucrative businesses, starting to move away from the main street?
Of course, when Cromer Avenue got developed, and I remember that well, when there wasn't very many businesses on Cromer Avenue, and when the mall came. The mall took a lot of business from the Main Street, a lot of traffic, especially out of town people, went to the mall, and then other businesses grew up around the mall, and you can see the difference then when people start moving on over to Cromer Avenue. High Street did take some business, but it was always a flow from Main Street to High Street in them days. People shopped both places, but the mall certainly made the biggest difference to Main Street.
And I guess when the train eventually shut down, its passenger service, I guess, that had a lot to do with Main Street also.
Certainly did. When the buses came on, I remember that well. When the buses first came on, I remember my first trip to St. John's on the bus, and you can certainly see the difference in the number of people from times the train was expected to arrive, and you see the hundreds of people that got off the train. I mean, it was just hundreds of people everywhere. And then when the buses came, of course, they still had to come to Main Street to get the bus. But it was different. You probably didn't see people shop and wander around Main Street like you did when the train, because the train just stopped for a period of time, people got off. It was different with the buses. The buses started on Main Street, so people came to Main Street, got on the bus and left. So you didn't see as many people shopping on Main Street and hanging around, going into the restaurants like they did when the train was there. So it had a big impact when they took the train off. It was so much. The greatest thing that I remember that before I got elected at one time, I think it was in the '93 election, there was a challenge that Windsor needed $2 million for water and sewer. And a lot of people figured that the government of the day wasn't prepared to do it. And it was the '89 election, I'm sorry, '89 election. When I was running. And I remember that when Brian Peckford talked to me about it in '87, before that's when we started fighting for it, the water, the infrastructure money for Windsor. In '89, I met with Tom Ryder, who was the Premier at the time, just before the election. I remember a meeting at the hotel in St. John's, and I told him that I was running in the election for PC party. And we've had a lot of discussions on this capital works money for Windsor at the time. And Eugene Toot was on council at the time. And Eugene said to me before I went to St. John's, he said, "Ray, if you can get that money approved, I'll walk Main Street in my bare feet." And I remember at the hotel talking to government officials, municipal affairs, and Tom Ryder, who was the Premier at the time. Before I left that hotel room that night, Tom agreed, we'll do that project, and the money will be there, and the officials said they'll draw up the papers, they'll have the money allocated for Windsor. They put it in writing to me that it would be done. And I came back and told Eugene too, And within a couple of days, Eugene was walking down Main Street in his bare feet. And the paper at the day, the advertiser, I believe I got a copy of it somewhere. And they took a picture of Eugene walking Main Street and said, well, we finally got it, and I told Ray Hunter that I would do it, and I'm walking this street today because we got the $2 million.
At what point did you decide to enter the municipal politics in Windsor?
For the first 2 or 3 years living here, I've lived in town. When I got married, an opportunity came to buy this house here on Clark Street. That was in 1973. And when I came here in 73, I started to attend council meetings for interest, to see what was happening around town. And then in 77, when I found out there's a new election coming up, I ran for council and got elected.
During your time as mayor, it seemed there was a good community spirit. People raised money to build the stadium and raise money for the pool. Windsor didn't have the luxury of a great uncle like other communities did. Windsor struggled for many years, and its people had a lot of pride in its community,
That's right.
no matter what, and they got out and they done what was necessary to do. What's your feelings on that as mayor during your tenure?
I think that in a community, when you get together for a major project, whether it be like the Lions Club raising money for the swimming pool, the Windsor Stadium Committee raising money for the stadium, it gives a focus for the community. People get together because they know that they're raising some money for some project that is going to mean a lot to the residents presently and residents in the future. And it drew the town together so as we all knew we were doing it for the town, and it made us feel like we were one group.
How did the councils get through the really tough years in Windsor? Because they had it tough for a long time following the demise of the train and the passenger service and the mall coming to town. Windsor was booming on Main Street,
Right.
and all of a sudden a lot of the businesses started to move towards the mall and into the mall and away from Main Street, and Windsor came into some difficult times, but they survived.
What we did, we kept looking to the provincial government, to the federal government, to different programs, talking to the business people, again, trying to see what the possible answers could be to all of this. And I think that the council showed a genuine interest in the town, and I think that the people in Windsor at the time saw that, well, this group of fellows are up there, they're trying, and ladies, are up there trying to make our town better. And again, it gave us, we're in this together, so let's see what we can do for the best of the town, and that's what we did.
What are your memories as mayor of Windsor?
The memories of Friday from Windsor was the fact that we had a continual struggle. Yes, we had some successes, but we struggling all the way along. We didn't have that big uncle, Abitibi, Price Brothers, etc., to give us what we wanted. We just had to go and fight and scratch, and many times we didn't have a very favorable or sympathetic provincial government either. So it just like when things get tough, that's when the tough get going.
What were some of the highs and lows during your stint as mayor and council?
One of the high points, I think, was when we started to get a few dollars together to reward the town for its struggles. For instance, when through Grain Flight and Clyde Wells the money came that for the recreation centre. That was a high point. Prior to that was when the stadium opened. Prior to that is when we managed to get some money through various programs like the Residential Rehabilitation Assistance Program and neighborhood improvement programs. Those federal and provincial governments that brought some money to the town of Windsor and allowed us to upgrade a lot of the services that we had. And again, that the downs were were more prevalent than the ups, but we pulled through.
This year marks the 75th anniversary of Windsor as the first incorporated municipality in Newfoundland. That must make you feel somewhat proud knowing that your town that you adopted when you came to Windsor, as it was at the time, was the first incorporated municipality on the island, and no one could take that away from you. And it is something to be proud of.
I think it shows that way back there in 1938 and prior to 1938, the people who lived in Grand Falls Station at the time, before 1938, and Windsor after 38, became known as a group of people that were going to work together, who were going to try to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, not to depend on somebody else. And when the idea came, we need some kind of local government to take care of some of the problems, that's when the movement started to have the formation of a town. And there was no councils anywhere in Newfoundland other than in St. John's at the time. And the fact that the people here wanted to see something like that shows their ingenuity, their creativeness, and their willingness to look for answers and find them. And 1938, a group of people found the answer when town was incorporated.
3 years later, in 1942, the Windsor Act was proclaimed. In 38, I believe, was the Board of Management.
Yes.
And in 42, the Windsor Act was proclaimed as a town council.
That's right. Yeah, there's a Board of Management before, and that Board of Management was to prepare the way, more or less, for a full-fledged town council. And from that time, and I think what happened there too was that as time went by, the provincial government or the colonial government at the time, before 1949, were trying to find ways of solving some of the problems of communities the size of Grand Falls Station, the size of Windsor. And between the people at government level in St. John's and the people at the municipal level here in what was Windsor, saw that, well, this seems like a good way to solve the problem. Incorporate a town, have an elected council to take responsibility for the planning and for the operation of the town. And it's a pattern that all the towns in Newfoundland are following today, even the town of Grand Falls, Windsor, where we are right now. This town is benefiting from what the people in the town of Windsor did prior to 1942 or 1938. Now, this is the coat of arms of Windsor. Of course, that's the corner of Windsor Castle, that where the town of Windsor got its name, and that's Windsor Castle there. Now, that was at the town hall of the present Grand Falls, Windsor, but I think that's missing now. I don't know if anybody knows where it is. And of course, that's a picture that that was on the centennial year, and that's the picture of the Windsor part of town. There's Cohen's, there's Riff's, there's the old theater, and that's the water tank, and those are the three councils that I served on in Windsor. That's the first one there, 77, and the next one there in 81, my first term as mayor, and that's the council that discussed amalgamation, and they served an extra year, make 5 years. And of course, then all those pictures over there, that's the first amalgamated council. And then up top is the second amalgamated council, and that's the charter that was signed on January 1st, 1991 by Ty Wells.
As you can see from the reflections, the evolution of Windsor came full cycle in the 60s and 70s, with businesses lining Main Street from the Globe Cafe to Herman's Shoe Repair. Windsor was a major retail player in those days, with upwards of 25 or more stores and restaurants. As time went on, fewer and fewer people were using the passenger train. 1969 saw the last of the passenger service and the advent of the road cruiser bus system. With the evolution of the mall and loss of the passenger service, Main Street was suffering. By the late 80s, Windsor was having difficult times. The Liberal government of the day had a commissioner study the possible merger of Grand Falls and Windsor. On January the 1st, 1991, they amalgamated and became known as Grand Falls Windsor, with the former mayor of Windsor, Walwyn Blackmore, becoming its first mayor.
Thank you.